Hi, my name is Pete. I work for a consultancy called ThoughtWorks. That's TH, I always say it as an F, but it's a TH, ThoughtWorks. Before I get going, I want to ask you guys a little bit of a question to get a feel for the audience. First of all, how many of you guys use Selenium? Right? How many of you guys have done any kind of development or testing with native iOS applications? Okay. And how many of you guys have used Cucumber before? Okay, good. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about Frank. The long-winded explanation of Frank is it's an automated testing tool for native iOS applications. For this audience, it's kind of like it's kind of like Selenium, but for native iOS applications, so iPhone and iPad applications. So originally, we created Frank. My team created Frank to help build an iPad product, which we're just wrapping up now, or we're just wrapping up the next iteration of. When we started the project, we had very little background in Objective-C, but we were coming from a real place of passion of automated testing. A lot of the culture in ThoughtWorks is about automated testing and how much it helps us. And so we weren't very experienced with Objective-C. We looked into unit testing with Objective-C, and we were kind of intimidated by what was out there. It seemed really scary, frankly. And so what we wanted to do was get a kind of a broad safety net of automated acceptance tests, and then fill in the gaps with a more low-level unit tests. We looked at what was out there, and I was actually pretty surprised that there wasn't that much out there. There's a tool called UISpec, which I'm going to be talking about more in a second. That's more of a lower-level testing tool. There was a tool called Brominet, or Bromine, kind of Selenium-themed, I guess, and kind of a thing associated with that called Brominet. And there was also a tool called iQuke, which is actually very similar to Frank. And none of them quite fit what we wanted to do. So we decided that we'd build something ourselves. So I'm going to give you a demo, so kind of live demo, so it might all go horribly wrong. We'll see. We'll learn together. So I have for this demo, so this is the iPhone simulator, and it's running a kind of a simple example application. And this application, I think, is an employee administrator application. So it works just like an iPhone works. And this is the test that I'm going to be running. So what I want to do is test adding a test user. So I'm going to follow the steps, and we're going to kind of do it step by step. Actually, I just realized I need to... Actually, okay, we can do it this way. So when I touch the Add User button, and I fill in the text fields as follows, I'm probably not going to type it exactly right. Password needs to be the same. And I touch Save. Then I should be on the user screen. Yes, I am. And I should see a table containing Brian. Or in this case, I typed in junk, so here's the junk I typed in. So that's a pretty standard kind of test script that you might run as a regular user, or as a manual tester. And then I'm going to attempt to run the same test using Frank. So we launch the application. We touch the Add User button, we fill in the text fields, and we touch Save. We're back on the home screen, and Brian Knorr is visible up here. So that's the basic value that Frank brings is, I think, very similar to the basic value that Selenium brings. It automates tests that you would normally run by hand. So we can run all of the tests, and so just then I just ran just that specific test. Now we're running the whole test suite, and in between each test we're restarting the application to make sure that the state is reset between between tests, and it's just going to run through and kind of do its thing. So the stuff on the left is Cucumber scripts, and the stuff on the right is obviously the application. So I'm going to leave that running and go back to slides. So I'm going to go into a bit of details as to how all this stuff actually works. So when you build your native iOS application, you build a test version of that application. Speak up. That test version of the application, you embed inside of it a little server, little HTTP server. And when you launch the application, that HTTP server starts up with the application. Your application works as normal, but you've also got this little side channel that's sitting there waiting for commands. You then, in your test scripts, which are right now they're written in Cucumber, but they could be written in another language, JUnit, JBehave, SpecFlow, any other NUnit, that will interpret your test script, send commands over the wire over via HTTP to the Frank server. The Frank server will interpret those commands. So let's say the command is touch a button. It will say, OK, he wants to touch a button marked add user. It'll scan through the elements that are inside the running application and press that button, and then send data back to your test script saying what happened, like yes, I touched the button, or no, I couldn't find that button. So that's the basic setup is. And normally these things, at least for most scenarios, these are running on the same machine, but it's very convenient to run over HTTP because it's a very well-known protocol. There's libraries for it in every single language I could think of. So it's a nice setup. So internally, the reason it was called Frank was because we kind of took a bunch of existing tools and kind of sewed them together to create this Frankenstein's monster of tooling. So the core of Frank is a lower-level testing library, UI spec testing library I mentioned earlier. So that does all of the heavy lifting of introspecting on the state of the application, finding elements, simulating touch events, and then sending back the state of the application, or finding out more about the state of the application so it can send it back to the Ruby code. The server component here is a little HTTP server called Cocoa HTTP server, and then on the client side we're using Cucumber for the writing the high-level tests, and then a few different Ruby gems for kind of sewing everything together. And we also, kind of as part of working on this project, we created a few things of our own. We created Sim Launcher, which is a tool for launching arbitrary applications in the iOS simulator, and a couple of Cucumber formatters that are useful for when you're running kind of slow running tests, because these are relatively slow because of the nature of the automation. So Cucumber, so you guys, a lot of you don't know that much about Cucumber. The idea of Cucumber is to express your tests in a way that a business user can understand. So ideally, you're expressing your requirements and you can show them to a business stakeholder, and the business stakeholder can say, yes, that's right, or hopefully, yes, that's kind of right, but you missed a requirement here, it needs to do this thing. That's really what you want, is feedback, right? You want someone to say, you're testing the wrong thing, because if you're testing the wrong thing, why even bother writing the tests? So on the one hand, you want something that business users can understand. On the other hand, you want something that a computer can understand and automate because you don't want to do it yourself. So that's the real value of Cucumber. And most commonly, it's used for web applications. I think it's very commonly used with Selenium or WebDriver. But you could, in theory, use it for anything. It's not tied to web testing. So I'm going to quickly run through like a kind of a sample Cucumber scenario. So this should be human readable. The scenario is called successful login. And given I launch the application, when I fill in this text box with this value and this text box with this value, and I touch this button, then I should see some results. So human readable, a user can look at that and say, that's right, or ideally they can say that's kind of right, but actually they shouldn't be taken to the home screen. They should be taken to a screen that says welcome, welcome for your first time or something. And this is also totally executable Frank steps. So if you implemented a native application that met these requirements and ran these tests, they would pass. If those requirements weren't met, they would fail. So you've got business requirements from the user, actual working code, and something that verifies that those two are together or those two are slightly off. OK, so this is kind of magical. Like, this doesn't look like code. How does it run? How does it actually work? So honestly, the way it actually works is kind of hokey. Slightly scary regular expressions and not so scary Ruby unless you've never done any Ruby before, in which case it might be a little bit scary, but it's OK. So when Cucumber is running through these steps, what it does is for every single line, it matches it with a regular expression. So it says, does something match this regular expression right here? If it matches, then it executes the Ruby code inside this block. So in this case, if the step was, then I should see foo button, then Cucumber will put foo into this variable, and then it will execute this code. So it will create a string saying button marked foo, and then it will call this method saying check element exists that matches this. So that's kind of the magic that works together. You can do some more advanced stuff with Cucumber, but as a side note that I'm not going to get into, you need to be very careful. And this is software. Treat it like software. Don't treat it like a macro that you're writing in Word. It's a real system that you're building. And a very important thing to note is you don't normally have to do this kind of scary stuff yourself. If you're doing standard iPhone if you're doing kind of standard iPhone stuff with tables and buttons and checking to see text elements, there's a lot of pre-canned stuff already available with Frank, just in the same way as if you're coming from a web testing background with Cucumber, you have WebWrap or Capybara, which are similar kind of, give you a lot of pre-canned stuff so you don't need to know too much about the internals. So here's a lot of the standard stuff that comes with Frank kind of out of the box. So the standard stuff of filling in forms, stuff related to table cells, because if you're doing iOS development or if you're doing iPhone development in particular, a lot of the UI, I mean, if you own an iPhone, you notice that a lot of the UI is the same. It's tables and touching on tables and things sliding to the left and the right. And stuff for checking on the state, I should see foo, I should wait to see foo, which I think most automated testers know. The really tricky thing is like when you check for something too soon and then it's already happened, or you check for something and it hasn't happened yet and you say that hasn't happened and then it happens, all that kind of stuff. And also, so the difference between web testing and testing on a device is devices do physical things. So a lot of the testing that we did was around orientation, particularly with iPad applications. A lot of times when you rotate it, you want it to look different. You want certain elements to be here or not be here. You want it to behave in different ways. And you need a way to automate that. Another thing that you are guaranteed to get burned with if you do iOS development is memory warnings. You're managing your own memory. It's really hard, especially if you're not used to it. And this is a great way of like really punishing your developers by like, I can make your app crash whenever I want to, basically. And yeah, there's more steps available than just this. This is just kind of a sample. So the selector syntax is similar to CSS or XPath, which you'd probably be using with Selenium. So obviously, the same as with CSS or XPath, you're trying to select a specific element. So you don't want to touch any button in your app. You want to touch a specific button that's marked add, but it's the one marked add next to the specific user that you want to add or save or delete or whatever. So it's kind of similar to CSS. It comes from the UI spec library that we use, and that's an Objective-C library. And the guy that wrote it kind of basically took the Objective-C and deleted the square brackets, so it looks kind of strange, but it's pretty understandable. So this particular example says find the table, and then inside of that find a button that has the accessibility label of add. So very similar to what you do drilling down with CSS. As well as it does this basic kind of stuff you need to do. traversal, so you can say, give me all the children of this element, or give me the first child of this element, or give me the parent, so you can drill down to find something, and then drill up, and then drill kind of down sideways to find the button. And filtering, obviously, so you're only interested in touching buttons, or you're only interested in touching things that have a specific label. And so Frank also comes with a tool called Symbiote. It's kind of like Firebug for iOS. So what we have right here is the running application, and it's got this little Frank server running inside of it, so we can talk to it. So every time we hit refresh up here, and you have to do it manually because it's kind of an expensive process, it updates this list of accessibility labels to reflect what's currently on the screen. So if I change the screen to here and click refresh, it shows a list of the current kind of interesting things in the UI. And if you're not sure if something is actually what you want it to be, or if you're not sure if the thing that if this is the thing you think you're interested in, you can click here, and you'll see we send a command to the running application and ask it to flash. So if I click here on user roles, you'll see user roles in the UI flash, and the same thing would happen for any of the other elements. So that's really useful when you're writing your selectors and you're not quite sure, like, is this really going to select the element that I want, or is this going to select something completely different, or is it not going to select anything at all? You can also dump the entire DOM, and turns out that the UI doesn't work when you make it small. So every time you hit refresh, you dump the entire. It's not called the DOM in iOS, it's called like the view hierarchy or something like that, but essentially it's like the DOM that you're inspecting in Firebug. So this is this huge verbose thing that you don't normally have to look at, so don't be too scared. But it's useful when you just can't quite figure out why something's not working. You do have all of this data available to you. And you can test CSS selectors here to see, again, to flash arbitrary things. So let's say I want to check that when I do view marked user roles, that it actually selects the right thing. It's going to select the right thing. And obviously, most of the time, this would be a more complicated selector. OK, so I want to talk a little bit about what's different between native testing a native app versus testing with web apps. The biggest difference, I think, is state. So one of the really nice things about web apps from a testing point of view is every time you hit a web page, it's the same web page. It doesn't remember where you just were. There's some exceptions, obviously, for cookies and sessions, stuff like that. But in general, if you want to test a new thing, you just go to a new web page. With an iOS application, unless you've restarted the application, it's where it was the last time you ran your test, or with the last test you ran. So if you have 5 tests, then they're going to run in order and they're going to affect each other. So you kind of have 2 options there. You can reset the state of the application every time by restarting the application, or you can structure your tests, kind of embrace the fact that they're interfering with each other, and kind of leverage that to speed up your tests. There's the hardware constraints are there, and they're different to what they are with web. So with web, like when you're doing performance testing, you're interested in load. You're interested, like, how does it perform when I slam it with 5,000 users all buying the same orange or whatever. With iOS, you're more interested in how does it perform when it gets 4 memory warnings in a row, and then I rotate it, and then I give it another memory warning. So it's different kind of edge cases that you're kind of poking at. There's only one platform, so this is really great news, right? Like instead of Safari, Chrome, IE6 installed on OS X, all that kind of fun stuff, it's just it's one platform. So that's great. And the testing tooling is still immature. So Frank, I think, is a great tool. It's ready to be used right now. We're having great success with it. But compared to Selenium and tools like Selenium, it's got some ways to go. I mean, mobile is a new technology, right, or newer technology. So there's stuff that's the same. Maintaining a big test suite is hard in web testing, and it's hard in native testing. Once you get a suite that runs for 45 minutes, you need to start thinking about how to get that runtime lower because you don't want users waiting, or you don't want your devs waiting 45 minutes to get feedback on something. So you can use a lot of the same techniques that you would use for improving a web app. You might look at journey-based testing rather than very independent tests. So yeah, that's similar kind of stuff. And I think that you have the similar challenges of dealing with your testing as a real part of your application. So you don't want all of your tests to be written in a super low level, like brittle selectors that are not going to last, or every single test refers to the same selector in the same way. You want to kind of start building in layers of abstraction and having high-level tests that are talking in the business language, and then lower-level tests that kind of translate that business language into something that the machine understands. And that's something that we're finding now as we're building up a large suite of tests. When a stakeholder looks at the iOS application and says, oh, this is cool, but I want the button to be up at the top, you don't want that to break 50 tests and have to go and find 50 individual tests and fix them. You want to be able to go to the mapping layer and say, oh, OK, button X is now up here, so I'll change this selector or something and make that distinction. So what's next for Frank? A big thing, and a part of the reason I'm here is I think we've got a lot to learn from more mature tooling like Selenium. We would love to stand on the shoulders of giants and not have to learn the same mistakes that people learn developing tools like Selenium. And I'm a developer. I'm really interested in testing, but I'm not doing it as a full-time job. And I think that Selenium has learned a lot of lessons from automated testers figuring out nicer ways to do things. And I think that Frank could learn a lot from that too. We're really interested right now in how we can share tests across platforms. So we're interested in the current client. They have Android apps, iPhone app, iPad app, maybe a BlackBerry client that they're looking at, and a web app. The requirements are exactly the same across all of these platforms. If you showed the requirements to a business user, they'd be exactly the same. But we're re-implementing the same app 4 or 5 times, and we're rewriting the tests 4 or 5 times. That just doesn't make any sense. The whole point of things like Cucumber is to share is to express requirements in a business language. So if they're expressed in business language, why do we need to rewrite them 5 times? We shouldn't have to. So we're really interested in using Cucumber or tools like Cucumber to allow us to talk to different platforms with the same tests. So express those tests and then run those tests against iPhone, iPad, Android, a web app, and verify those requirements are met across those platforms. And other stuff that I would love to see happen personally is Cucumber, moving past Cucumber. So I love Cucumber, I love Ruby, but I don't think everyone loves Cucumber, I don't think everyone loves Ruby. People are very experienced with other technologies, and Frank was designed to be used because it's this client-server model, and there's a nice API between them. You can drive it just as easily from the JavaScript that runs Symbiote. That web page uses the exact same API that Cucumber uses. So I really like that, and I really would love to see that proved out by another technology driving Frank. So something like JBehave or I don't know, any other technology really. That's about it. The slides are going to be available online. Frank is open source. We'd love more people to use it. We're a growing community. There's a mailing list. People answer your questions when you ask them, normally promptly, normally because it's me. Yeah, thank you very much.
I have a couple of questions. One of the question is, so does this require any specific setup, like you need to jailbreak the phone and all?
No, absolutely no need to jailbreak the phone or do anything to the device. The only requirement is that that when you're building the native application, you kind of include Frank inside. You have a test build that includes Frank inside, but no need to jailbreak or anything like that. No.
The other question is, whenever there's a firmware update on the phone, say you move from iOS 3.1 to 3.2, do I need to wait for the Frank update, or of course I do?
No, actually, so I'm really pleased you asked that. Actually, was really nice to have a set of tests move to a new version of the OS run those tests and see things break and fix them. And have that done in like half an hour. In half an hour, we knew what had broken. It wasn't 4 days of like really scary manual testing. And no, that when the platform updates, I don't think we had to do anything at all. I think we just upgraded the SDK and ran it. So yeah, it's actually good news rather than bad news on that front.
All right, cool.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Can you run those tests on a physical device?
In theory, yes. I've actually not got around to doing it. So it's an HTTP server, so you should be able to talk to it. The only catch is you need to know the IP address of the device. The Cocoa HTTP server uses Bonjour, so it will publish itself to the local area network. The only thing you can't do is rotate the device. In theory, that's the only thing I can think of. Like, unless you had like Lego Mindstorms, like, then that's the only restriction I can see. Oh, and simulating a memory warning you probably couldn't do.
The follow-up is that a security problem?
In what way? Oh, so you would never release this. You have two builds. So you have a testing build and you have production build. It doesn't go to production. Yeah. Good questions.
Sorry, you may have already covered this. I walked in a little bit late. Can you explain how you chose to kind of roll your own solution versus use what was provided with the iOS 4 SDK?
So the stuff that was out there was very early stages. So I have like a 20-minute rant in this podcast where I talk about this some more if you're really interested. But I have a real had a philosophical difference with the way that the other similar tools were doing it. They were very, very light on Objective-C. We're basically just dumping the entire DOM every single time, sending it all over the wire to Ruby code, and then the Ruby code was like parsing through the DOM and trying to find things, and then sending really low-level touch events back to the phone. I disagree with that. I've been burnt before with too much reliance on low-level stuff, and it means that it's totally restricted to only Ruby and Cucumber, essentially. I really liked the idea of doing something like Selenium, where there's a really nice clean divide and a strong API that you can talk to from any language. It's not kind of hacked together.
So I should be more specific. I meant like the UIA automation.
UI automation wasn't around. Sorry, I just like went off for no reason. UI automation wasn't around when we started working on it. We looked at it, and I have a lot of respect for the way for the tool that they have made. It's not a good tool for CI. There's no way to run it from the command line. ThoughtWorks is really big into CI. I hope a lot of you guys are really into CI. They don't even have a way of running it from the command line. It's very much targeted at record and playback style testing, which I think has its place, has some uses, but is not the kind of style of testing that we were looking at.
Is this Frank tool, is it available openly for implementing with any applications like
Yes,
iPhone
yeah,
apps
it's
right now? And
yeah,
how easy, or like do you have a tutorial or a document which explains how to integrate it with our applications?
So to answer your first question, yeah, it's available online. It's totally open source. We want more and more people to use it, so we can get more community and get other people to develop stuff, so we don't have to develop it ourselves. And there is documentation available. There's tutorials. Honestly, they're probably a little bit sparse. Frank is developing pretty quickly, and so the tutorials get out of date fairly quickly. But like I said, I think the main point of reference is the mailing list and asking questions. We're focused on delivering our own work, so we don't have the time to do all the documentation we need. But so it's more of a pull system than a push system. But yes, there is documentation out there.
So our app actually opens a VPN channel and all that. So are there any restrictions? I mean, UIs. It's mainly is done with UI and the XPath and CSS, right? So I don't see any issues there, but I just want to.
I can't think of any reason. I can't think of any interference between the fact that you're opening a VPN channel and the fact that you're running an HTTP server, but
Okay.
honestly, I'm not an expert on the network stack on iOS, so maybe there could be some crazy.
So we
crazy
should
kind
try
of
it out and maybe.
Yes, try it out and ask us questions.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that sounds good. All right.
Can you run this test in headless environment?
Yes, so we run it. We've been running it headlessly for 6 months, something like that. Long time. Yeah, it's one of our main goals. But after we proved that it actually worked, was getting it integrated into CI. So yeah, it runs headlessly. We also added some tooling for recording video of the test runs, because when it runs headlessly and you're not watching a test, sometimes you need to know why something failed. It's useful to have a video. But yeah, it runs headlessly fine and integrates with, right now we have it integrated with Hudson, Jenkins. It would integrate just fine with Go or Cruise or whatever.
So one concern is when you integrate some hook into your app, it can be invasive. And have you ran into any problems with integrating that on top of your app? I mean, to where you get a false negative or whatnot.
Yeah. I can't think of anything. No, I can't think of it. It's very, it kind of, possibly in terms of performance, obviously it's an HTTP server that's running, so I can imagine kind of maybe you'd get some, maybe some interference where it hits memory warnings more often or something like that, but no, I can't really think about it. It's a very, very lightweight tool, and the amount of time you're sending it commands is very small compared to the amount of time your app is doing regular work, so I don't think there'd be that many issues with that.
I never used Cucumber before. Is it a full-fledged programming language, or it's how would you describe it? I mean, compared to Selenium, for example, where you have a very mature API.
So I would describe Cucumber definitely not as a fully fledged programming language, but I would describe it as an interface into Ruby, which definitely is a fully fledged programming language. So one of the things I really like about Cucumber is it encourages you to, or kind of forces you, because it's really constrained in what you can do. There's no conditional logic, there's no looping, it's not Turing complete, nothing like that. So you're forced to write really high-level tests that express things in a business language, users aren't interested in for loops, and then implement, interpret those into something a machine can understand using a real programming language like Ruby. So I personally really like that philosophy. But like I said,
what do you do if you need looping, for example?
You loop in Ruby. So you might have a test that says, given I add these 5 users to the system, and so there's a table structure, so you can write the user's information out in tabular format, and then that entire table of kind of raw data is passed to your Ruby code, and your Ruby code loops through the table and does the heavy lifting of actually adding
and
stuff.
Conditional logic?
Same deal.
Same stuff.
Yeah, if you have an if-else kind of thing, you write 2 tests. You have tests for each path through the system. So again, I think that makes sense for expressing requirements in something that a user can understand. The average business person does have a hard time so they do that and then they do that, or they don't do that, because it's I think it's a benefit rather than a drawback that there isn't looping and conditionals and stuff like that.
I'm not used to it. So
Yeah, it's definitely a different mindset for sure.
UI web view. If I have a UI web view in my app, and if I'm loading an external website into my app, so could I? No, there's no support for automating. As far as I know, no one has done anything with automating a UI web view inside an embedded UI web view, is what you're saying. Yeah. No, there isn't anything, and in theory you could get it to work, but I think I would describe that as not the sweet spot for Frank. Yeah. No. You guys can ask after the meetup.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I'll be here. You guys can ask me loads of questions.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, guys.
I'll do a little bit of just a couple of slides just to kind of warm things up, and then I'll switch to some demos of iPhone and Android with Selenium 2. So yeah, you should follow me on Twitter, HUGS. So Selenium 2, the whys and the whats. There's a bigger talk that I gave on everything about Selenium 2, but this is just about mobile. The biggest feature that is coming with Selenium 2 is Android and iPhone support. And talking with anybody about mobile testing the last year or two, it seems like it really is coming down to these three categories. Doing it on an emulator, doing it on a real device, but tethered to a workstation like this. And then the last one is a real device and real location, real network, like imagine an iPhone on Verizon in Times Square. Selenium 2 actually covers those first two, in an emulator on your laptop or on an actual tethered device. The last one, ironically, is perhaps truest to the mission statement of Selenium, to match exactly as close as possible the true end-to-end test emulating a system behavior. The problem is, this is fundamental difference between desktop testing and mobile testing, is that with desktop testing, whether the Firefox or IE, whatever is running on your desktop, locally or on the cloud, it's the same execution path. You can know it's wherever you run it, it works. With the phone networks, I'll just be nice. With the devices and the phone networks, they can change things quite a bit. So I think the truest dream, I think, for Selenium to live up to its mission statement, at some point we'll have real devices and real location and real network. This is where my role as crazy idea guy at Sauce comes into play, because I think to really do this in an automated fashion, I think we're going to need robot helicopters. I think that's all I'll say about that now. But we're not there yet, but I'll see if I can try some demos for the first two now. The raging debate going on also with mobile testing is that the big thing is native versus web, right? When the iPhone first came out, ironically, Steve Jobs tried to sell everybody on mobile web. They would have none of it. Then native apps came out, and then it's been kind of the iPhone native app stuff for the last couple of years. Now that Android has kind of reached parity with iPhone, it's now kind of a two-company town. Forget all those other outfits like. Well, I won't name them, but anyway, it's iPhone and Android, right? But as the iPhone is no longer that monopoly in the smartphone market, I can see a lot of companies now are starting to say, well, if we do web and JavaScript and HTML, we don't have to then go out and hire Objective-C and Java programs and all these like platform-specific developer skill sets. If you just pick one platform, the web, and you compile that to all these platforms, that's what works. So I think that scale is actually starting to tip in mobile web's direction. And some other kind of thoughts behind that is the fact, way back in the beginning, there wasn't the web. The web came around, but that was always a small subset of the market. And the nice thing about the web and JavaScript, it keeps growing. It keeps growing everywhere. And now it's jumped out of the desktop and going into mobile. Some of the data points that I've cherry-picked is the Sentia project, the Sprout Core project, PhoneGap. They've got some really sexy websites. They're making a big strategic bet on mobile web specifically. Other slides that I haven't put on here are like Titanium. That's another thing where you can compile webby stuff into native applications. So the Selenium lives here. Selenium lives in the web, big surprise. And as part of our world domination plan is, the web keeps on going everywhere. And this is the way I think we see the future. So that's a nice place to be. The original argument against Selenium when it came out 7 years ago is that it just does web apps. The nice thing about that is like, yes, you're right, it just does web. And that's the only thing that matters anymore. So that's not entirely true, but I think that's where things are going. So exactly. So at least that's what, if you're going to pick native versus web, and since Selenium is a web testing tool for the desktop, it makes sense that the first thing we do with mobile is mobile web. But things like Frank and some other stuff that I saw at the Python convention over the weekend, a project called Moit that does focus on native things. Actually, I think testing tools in mobile will go hand in hand for testing native apps and web apps. I'll come back to that in a little bit. You'll see where it makes sense to have those native app testing things. So how do you actually do this with Selenium? This is I'm a big fan of utterly simplistic tutorials, getting started kind of guides. I only read like the first 5 pages of any kind of tutorial book anyway. It's like after that, okay, fine, I got it. I can figure it out on my own. So here's like the actual minimal steps that you need to get started with mobile testing with Selenium. First, check out the project. code.google.com/p/selenium. And I think it's really small print there, but you have the slides later. Just check it out. I think in the future, it'll probably be all fancy in the App Store, stuff like that. But for now, check out the project and get all the source code. So I will go through the steps now to check this stuff out and get this running on Android, and then also show you the steps on how to do this on Apple. It's going to compare and contrast how many steps are involved for now. But with Android, first thing you do is download the SDK, then you unpack it, then you have to update it, because the actual package that you download really has nothing other than the ability to download more stuff. So you download that. Then you create an AVD. It's an Android virtual device. In this particular case, I'm naming it my Android. T is a profile type. It's kind of almost similar to types of Android phones. Like I imagine there's certain kind of configurations. Some might represent Android tablets. Some might represent Android 1.6 devices. 3.0 is the latest version. So they've got like 16 different profiles. I picked 8 for some arbitrary reason. And then 100 is the size of the SD card, or at least in this case, a virtual storage for this device. So now that I've created it, and it's called My Android, I then will start the emulator. A couple of tips here: no audio and no boot animation are 2 tips that I've seen that actually make the boot sequence for the emulator a little bit faster. And then in this particular case, I just scaled it down to 80% so it actually fit on my screen. That's one of the little trial and error things. And then the actual list, or the description of what I was going to talk about today was specifically how do you do Selenium 2 with mobile and how you do it with continuous integration. The trick for continuous integration with this stuff is you need to be able to launch the emulator from the command line. So there you go. That's step number 1. I'll come back to the other step number 2, in just a second. One thing as kind of a setup step, you have to install the, I don't know what APK is short for, but it's probably some kind of application package, perhaps. You have to install that, and we have a pre-built that's in the Selenium source code. This is also just on the downloads page for the project. But I will now kind of dive into exactly what Selenium 2 on Android really is. Actually, let me show you. Wait, if I go back to the screenshot. Right, so what the Selenium 2 app on both iPhone and Android is, it's an app that does 2 things. One, it's got a built-in web server, embedded Jetty, that's listening on port 8080. And it's very similar, kind of like a Selenium remote control. Selenium remote control is kind of a web server that connect to and you can drive a browser. The Android app for Selenium it's just like that, but it only has access to one platform and one browser, the Android browser. So it's this web browser, and it's also got an embedded WebKit. So you now connect to it from anywhere on the web to this little emulator or a tethered device, and then you'll drive it just like you would any other kind of Selenium thing. So here's the trick. One, you have to figure out in a CI environment how to launch the emulator. The second thing you have to do is figure out how to, once the emulator is launched, launch this app. So there's one other command line that you have to call, and that is these 2 things. First, you have to kind of turn on port forwarding. I don't know why, but you just have to do it. It's kind of like you've got the emulator and your laptop. They're really 2 networks, or 2 computers on a similar network, and to do the port forwarding, it's magic that you have to do to get them to be able to talk to each other. That's it. And then the second key part for CI is to be able to, from your desktop, launch the Selenium 2 app in the emulator. Once you have all this stuff set up, this is step 1, really, that you have to do repeatably. And this is then step 2. And probably this. OK, really, there's 3 steps, right? So this is step 2. This is step 3. Once you have that, you're in the app, and you can start testing. I'll show a demo later. OK, so that's Android, right? OK, this is iPhone. You open the project. Again, if you checked out Selenium, you build and run, and ta-da, you're done. That's all you have to do. So the key thing is I'm probably making a gross generalization of all the gymnastics you have to go through just to download Xcode. I'm kind of skipping that. It's kind of messy these days, right? But generally, it's run Xcode, build and run. And you can actually do that from the command line. There's two ways to do this from the command line. This was kind of how to do it manually. There's two projects that are not embedded into the Selenium project yet, but they should be. They're separate now. One is called iphonesim, and this is a project that you can use to basically launch the iPhone simulator. And then the other thing that you need, I didn't see if I have it on a slide. I was kind of Googling around, and really, you want to be able to, in addition to be able to boot the simulator, you need to find a way to actually compile that project and get it into the iPhone app. So the way to do that, you compile it and run it from Xcode. This is a command line way to do it from the command line. So in this particular example, it's actually using AppleScript, of course, crazy monstrosity, but hey, it works, right? Again, the key thing is you need to be able to launch the emulator and you need to be able to install and launch that app. You do those two things and then you're good. So, sorry for all the stuff here. Now I think my next step is demos, so I guess I have to show you demos, right? Okay, so iPhone, the thing I've learned the hard way is, there we go. The iPhone works better than Android. Well, actually I love Android. This is my personal phone. But when it comes to testing, iPhone just ends up better. It might be a conspiracy theory that because I have a Mac, the iPhone emulating test is just better. Other weird thing is that Apple calls these simulators, the iPhone is simulator, but this is it's the Android emulator, iPhone simulator. It's weird, but I think it's the same thing. Sorry, okay, so I've got this thing launched, and I did it through the command line, fancy way. So I'm just going to kind of do a sample test here. Before I kind of do it through the phone, I will kind of show you what the sample test is. Steve Hazel, other co-founder at Sauce Labs, he wrote this thing called CodePad. The test I'm going to do in iPhone and Android is this. It's an executable paste bin, so I'm just going to do like print hello plus world, and it can run the code. It's fun if you want to try it to import OS rm-rf. You can do all that kind of stuff if you want to try to break it, see if it works. But basically, it's a very simple sample application. You upload code, it runs on the server, you get a result. So this is kind of your sample application under test. So that's what I'm going to show you right here. So can you see that? Maybe I can make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so from Selenium, import WebDriver. And we've got the Selenium 2 and the Selenium 1 APIs all in the Selenium object. This is the Python code, so Selenium 2 lives under the WebDriver namespace. So this has actually confused a lot of people, and I would say the analogy is very similar to Apple when they moved to OS 10. The OS 9 bindings were still available in OS 10. They just called it Carbon, and then the OS 10 bindings in OS 10 were called Cocoa. So it's kind of a way to imagine two APIs in one version. Selenium 1 is in Selenium 2. In Python, it's from Selenium, import Selenium, selenium.selenium namespace. Selenium 2 is available under the WebDriver namespace. So kind of footnote to history there. So now I will, the iPhone has an IP address. I'll connect to that. I should probably just copy the code. Right, so there we've got the CodePad. This is a nice thing about the Selenium 2 API. So you've got the web elements, kind of a very nice API. You can actually introspect all the elements, all kinds of fun stuff. So I'm going to select Python, so it's clicked that. I'm now going to enter some text in the text area. The first thing I do is get a link to the text area. You can kind of see that translated to find elements. Now I'm going to type hello world. The last thing to do then is get a handle to the submit button and then click that. Hopefully that works. I got in trouble for saying this, especially with Ruby people in the audience, but I say you don't need any stinking DSLs for testing because Python is beautiful enough by itself. I assert all you need is assert. And that's just plain old source code. No need for RSpec or Cucumber or whatever. Just good old assert gets me through the day. And then the test is over when you just do driver quit. And it deletes the session, but it doesn't clear the screen, which is kind of confusing if you're watching it go. But if I, anyway, so really the test is over. So that's really iPhone stuff. And again, from a CI environment, you might want to maybe kill the simulator, tear it down completely, and just kind of rinse and repeat from there. So that's iPhone. Now the Android. I'm going to cheat here and just show a movie. So because I can do this, fast forward. It's kind of like the scene from Spaceballs, right? So same thing, CodePad, same exact thing. The only difference is that I just said Android in there. Actually, the really way sorry, let me pause this. The real difference in how it connected to iPhone versus Android, it was really a different IP address. In this particular case, I had the whole port forwarding going on, so really it was localhost port 8080 on how it knew what operating system to connect to. It's very similar, again, conceptually to Selenium Remote Control. You set Selenium Remote Control up on a Linux box or a Windows box, whatever, it's an IP address and a port number as far as your tests are concerned. And it's the same API as far as your test is concerned. So the fact that I'm connecting to this IP address, port 8080, it really doesn't know that it's Android, but it's just telling it to do stuff anyway, and it's getting the results. Again, same stuff, and the test is over. One little tip that I've also learned is to do kind of assertions. The simplest thing that I had, actually I think if I go a little bit back here, another kind of thing that I did, hello world in driver get page source. That's actually a very expensive API call. It's kind of, there's probably a better thing, like if I really knew and spent some time actually writing this test properly, I would drill down into the element that just had the output and just go get the inner HTML or whatever the text of that section of the page. But when you really don't know what's going on in this thing, get page source is a great little cheat. Bring that over onto your laptop side and then kind of just regex whatever you want in that text. But it's an expensive call, so kind of be careful. So that's kind of through the emulator. Okay, this is where things are going to get a little bit risky and dicey. Okay, so I've got my Android phone here, right? It also took me a big part of the day to, if you open up Photo Booth, it reverses the image. It took me forever just to find the way that I can kind of show the image and have it not be mirrored. But anyway, so this is the device, and I'm going to have to do a couple of things here. First, I have to turn on port forwarding now to go to my device. If I do, let me get myself out of the way here because that's too distracting. ADP devices. That shows that I've got an HTC device connected. I will now, from Nextrick, launch the application. The trick in a CI environment is that you're going to have to find some way to turn this thing on. I don't know how to do that yet, but again, probably involves robots and helicopters and all kinds of crazy stuff, right? But anyway, so this is the device, and it's tethered. And if I connect it, it now is going to launch the Selenium 2 app. And I already kind of pre-installed that later. So that is installed. This is where the wheels are really going to fly off. From Selenium, import WebDriver. I have no idea if this is going to work. So if it doesn't, I'm just going to say, ta-da, I'm done. OK, so I don't think that has any UI related to it. Nope, not yet. OK. You can see this, right? Yeah, great. OK. So I might just do this, and then I won't go through the entire test scenario. Oops. Here we go. OK, so it's loading. Now, this is the fun part about real device, real network testing. If you notice, I'm on the edge network, not 3G. So when I was testing back in the corner, this was ridiculously slow. So granted, it was a true system test, but also I now, through my testing of this, it's like, T-Mobile is not too much of a fan of this. Let's see if I actually could do one more line of that test. Or, well, if it keeps going, maybe I'll just run it. Okay. Paste that. That shouldn't really do anything. I'll keep going until this gets frustrating. Or you guys get bored. Should I keep going? Yeah. Okay. Let me hide this. Okay. Is it going to click Python? Yes, it did. Did you see that go? All right, let's keep going. I could run this as a script automated, but that's not fun at all, right? I'm going to maybe select both of these lines, paste those in. Here we go. Is it going to enter the text into the field? Yes, it did. Okay, let's keep going. So the other thing I've learned from this crazy little demo is I need to create some kind of rig where I need to get 3 arms or figure out how to get it up there. I did click the submit button, didn't I? Let's try this again. I don't think that worked. So far, so good? Oh yeah, there it goes. It's clicking. It's doing something. Oh, it's loading the result page. The other thing is CodePad is usually rock solid, but it's been a little bit slow today. I think it's a function. Something's going on with EC2. So I might wait. Ah, there we go. And I screwed up the syntax. Did I? How did I mess that up? So if I do this, if I do one more, this will actually this should fail, right? Or it's a really crappy test and it passed even though it should have failed. Don't try this at home. Again, this is an expensive test. Yeah. It didn't. So it's a proper test because it failed properly, right? Okay. And then the last thing, if I do driver.quit, I think that'll just show something at the top. It won't really do anything interesting. Yeah, just clear out the screen. Yeah, really, so that's it. So I kind of showed that you can do it through the emulator or the simulator. You can do it through a tethered device. And doing it through the tethered device, this is cool because this was actually on the real network, which is another kind of a tip. That last thing of real device and real network and real location. And so that is kind of a function. Like it was running better here doing that same test than in the corner. So you kind of could already just use this, get this like this computer, this device, put it on a Roomba, drive it around the office. You might be able to do the real device, real networking thing. Anyway, so that's kind of crazy stuff. This will all get kind of streamlined to make it ridiculously easy. But I will post the slides if I can get back to said slides. The code is posted up as a gist on GitHub. There's the YouTube, the Android movie is posted, and a whole bunch of links that I had at PyCon, so you can kind of try this at home. And then actually this whole slideshow will also be posted as well. So I don't know if I actually had a slide to ask people for questions. Oh, one more thing. The thing that I saw at PyCon was a project called MOIT. I think it's short for mobile, MO, and then end-to-end testing. Her first name is Ing. I can't pronounce her last name yet. Didn't catch it, but she's an engineer at Intuit. And this project, I think, is very complementary to Frank. And this is where I think that native versus mobile is not really a debate, because we have an application for Selenium 2 that you need to launch. You could use, besides the command line tools, you could use something like Frank or MOIT to launch the Selenium 2 application. Also, with MOIT built in, it has support for natively testing BlackBerry and Android just out of the box. It's Python only at the moment. I will be inspired on behalf of the Selenium project to see how much I can, see how much we can kind of get into the Selenium fold. But Frank and MOIT, I think, are kind of spiritually cousins or sisters or brothers. I don't know which one it is. But anyway, so that's the demo. Cool. Questions? Do we have to do the mic?
Yeah, I just got
it.
Have you looked at Fennec for mobile, and if so, do you need help with writing bindings for that?
No and yes.
Okay, cool. I'll talk to some people then.
Excellent.
Thank you.
In the back?
Hi there. I think you sort of went by there a little bit quick there, so maybe I missed it. But beyond like the click and the text input, kind of device inputs, I mean, you know, there are a lot of native stuff like, you know, wiping and pinching and those like kind of user inputs. Is Selenium 2 ready for that? And also the other thing I sort of want to know about is that kind of relate to the friend discussion. I mean, now that with HTML5 you have offline storage, how are you kind of handling that kind of state information?
So two things. For all of the native types and clicks and stuff like that. So first of all, yeah, doing click, that's actually kind of a social faux pas. You know, on a mobile device, it's called click. We should change that, right? So it should at least be touch, right? But that's, I think, where, again, you want to use something like Moet or Frank, where at some point where you want to do something kind of native, you'll probably want to have access to an API that can call some more device-specific thing. Right now, Selenium 2 is just focused on going to pages, introspecting web elements, acting on those things. If you want to do, you know, pinching and zooming and rotating the device, that starts getting to the realm of more device-specific stuff, or at least having the access, you know, having the ability to call into the device to ask it to do that, as opposed to kind of faking it out the JavaScript layer. So I think the cheat answer is you'll want to use something like Moet or Frank, call into that to do something more fancy for a user interface interaction. The second question, what was the second question? Offline storage. I think my attitude on that is I won't worry about it, because that is some API that your JavaScript calls into under the hood, right? And so as far as Selenium is concerned, it's just going to go to a page. It's going to interact with the site, and that storage stuff will either be there or it won't. And you can use JavaScript to introspect the storage, right? So I would think it's not something that's really Selenium has to worry about, because it knows how to talk to a web page. JavaScript in that web page knows how to talk to offline storage, so because of that, it's not a problem. We don't need to have any explicit extra APIs to do that. At least that's my opinion now.
Hi. If you have, say, multiple devices on the network, say I have 2 iPhones, so I know you are going to like basically identify based on the IP address of the device, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there any problem interacting with 2 devices at the same time?
I think it's actually it's probably easier. I haven't tried it with the iPhone, like 2 emulators on the same device. I don't even know if it's possible. Then there you go. With Android, I didn't even try it yet, so we'll find out. But I would suspect it is possible, and as long as you keep the IP addresses different, then you should be able to talk to it, just like having Firefox and Chrome like in the same. It is possible? Talk to him, not me. Yeah, oddly, I only tried one. So that was hard enough to get working. I did have the emulator for Android, emulator and the tethered device. It saw those 2 things, but I didn't do it at the same time. But yeah, it starts becoming an issue of just handling devices and IP addresses and ports, just like it is with regular Selenium, but it's even more complicated, or it's just as confusing.
Just a simple question. Can you take screenshots?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
On both iPhone and Android?
Yes, so it should be there. If it's not working, then it's a bug. But yeah, it should be there. One of the cool things, this is kind of actually on that topic, one of the most eye-opening things from that talk on Moet at PyCon was the big question with any app is like, how do you know when to proceed to the next step in your test? When it's this very simple, old-style Web 1.0 app, you know when the page finished loading, that's when it's done. And Web 2.0, Ajax-y, I don't know what we're on now. 2.0 seems 5 years old now, right? So what are we on, 3, 2.5? I don't know. Either way, an Ajax-y application, you usually have to instrument it. So wait for Ajax, wait for element, wait for condition, wait for element present. There's some kind of a thing that you have to wait for. What Moet does is it takes a screenshot of the mobile device, and it then does a command line call takes that screenshot, does a image magic command line call, and does an image diff. And if the image is not different, it'll keep waiting. Once the image, the screenshot is different, that, hey, whatever you did probably caused whatever, something to be changed, so it's time to move on with the rest of your test. I never thought of that, but now it's one of those why didn't I think about ideas. So, so screenshots better be there because it's actually a great hack to figure out how to, when you don't know how to really wait properly, just do an image diff thing when it's different, move on with your test. So that's kind of a cool little trick I'll definitely try. Again, try to put it in Selenium. What was that? If you have ads, it's just keep checking. You won't have to send it. Right, right. Yeah, every silver bullet was matched within a reason why it won't work, but anyway.
Same question. Do you need any specific setup like jailbreaking and rooting of the phone?
No, no. At least on the, I don't have an iPhone device to test it on, but this was not, well, I was about to say, it's just Android, so I didn't have to root it. But with both iPhone and Android, it was just an app that had to be installed. The tricky thing is that it's not an App Store app, so that's why you had to use XCode to kind of get it on there, but that's not jailbreaking. That's just a straight app. Yeah, we're pretty legit. We didn't have to do anything really crazy and sketchy to get this to work. It's just an app that lists as a web server and has an embedded WebKit. There's nothing crazy about it.
One more question. Thank you, Jason.
All right, thanks guys.